A new report in the Wall Street Journal outlines the lengths that Biden's inner circle worked to keep signs of aging under wraps. According to the report, senior White House advisors for more than a year have aggressively stage managed President Biden's schedule, his movements and personnel and interactions as they sought to minimize signs of how age has taken a toll on the oldest president in U.S. history. Joining me now is one of the authors of that report in the Journal, Emily Glazer. Also with us, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, Brian Stelter, and Chris Whipple. He's the author of The Fight of His Life Inside Joe Biden's White House. Emily, you and your team spoke with more than 24 current and former White House staffers. How did they try to manage President Biden, and what we now know are signs that he's aged, especially in the last 3 years of his presidency?
Well, Abby, for any president since Reagan up to this term in their presidency, Biden has had the fewest news conferences and interviews. He has had the smallest number of meetings with lawmakers since his prior years before, and that's according to visitor logs. And we've talked to a number of lawmakers and major donors that feel like even though there are some good days where Biden is sharp and detail-oriented, there are more and more bad days where he's forgetful. He doesn't really have his words speak very well. And they feel like there are even more of those bad days, and they're getting worse.
I mean, Chris, you've also reported extensively on this president in the White House. You've interacted with him for this book. Okay, what were those interactions like?
Well, the thing to understand here is that the DNA of this White House is controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, having written a book about it, that this White House is the most battened down, buttoned up, scripted White House in modern history. So while I was able to interview in real time almost all of Joe Biden's inner circle, when it came to Biden himself, the deal was written answers to written questions. I'd never heard of that before.
Was that a red flag for you?
Well, look, you know, you can look at it two ways. I mean, this is obviously a White House with either with something to hide or just obsessed with controlling the narrative. I will tell you that one of the president's closest friends thinks that Joe Biden should go up to Walter Reed, have a complete neurological exam, release the results, and let the chips fall. Now, I don't think that friend has said this out loud to Joe Biden, because that's a hard thing even for a close friend to tell him. But I don't think he's going there without a major push.
Chris, I have to just, it's a little bit surprising, I mean, a little stunning that you're writing a biography of the president and he wouldn't talk to you over the phone, on Zoom, anything like that. I mean, was part of the reporting that you did for the book, did it delve into this question of whether or not he had the stamina to be president?
Well, yeah.
And when you got to that point, did you feel like, well, how am I supposed to gauge that?
Well, by all accounts, the people I spoke to, including his closest friends, his inner circle, they all said that Biden was fine cognitively. He obviously walked like a zombie because he has arthritis and all the rest of it. But no, I didn't get any indication that he was cognitively impaired, and everybody insisted otherwise.
I mean, Brian, you may have heard the interview I just did with Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and she very notably said, I don't believe the polls. I don't believe these numbers, the Cook Political Report showing a movement toward Trump in 6 battleground states. I mean, this is, in a way, reminiscent of, frankly, the Trump era, in which they often said, don't believe the polls, don't believe what you're seeing, don't believe what you're hearing. I mean, is this risking going in that direction?
I think we are there. I think we're down that direction and we're there now. They're saying, don't believe your lying eyes, forget what you saw at the debate 2 weeks ago. And yet, you know, President Biden has been relatively invisible. Yes, he's giving speeches here and there. He's holding the summit. He's having a press conference on Thursday. But those are just table stakes. Those are just the basics of doing the job. We shouldn't treat this press conference like it's anything more than a normal part of doing the job. Although, as you pointed out, Emily, he's avoided doing so. I think you're absolutely right to point at the comparisons here between Biden and Trump, and the Biden-Trump years and the Trump years. We called it out in the Trump years. We've got to call it out now in the Biden years, when it seems there's a cover-up, when it seems that they are not able to take in feedback or criticism or dissent, because that's what's going on right now. A lot of people trying to call out what's going on and help draw attention to it.
So, Brian, I'm going to stay with you for just a second, because this just happened tonight. George Stephanopoulos, the ABC anchor who just interviewed President Biden last Friday in a really high-stakes interview, he was stopped by, it seems, TMZ and asked, "You've talked to him more than anybody else. Should Biden step down?" And then he said, "I don't think he can serve 4 more years." That's pretty stunning.
It is. Now, of course, George has come out and said, I shouldn't have said that. And ABC says, that's not the opinion of the network, it's just his opinion. But his opinion matters because he's the outsider that spent he's one of the outsiders, one of the few outsiders to have spent time with the president recently. I think, Abby, there's a lot of people who feel they've been conned. People who feel they've been fooled by this White House. And, you wonder about some journalists who feel that way as well.
Well, Emily, I mean, the Wall Street Journal reported and got a lot of heat for this report earlier about just asking the question, how is Biden behind closed doors? When you went back to some of those people, did they express a change of viewpoint now that this is out in the open?
So it's interesting because a lot of people still won't put their names to these messages. I have talked to a number of major donors who will say that they're not donating anymore, they won't bundle anymore, they're very concerned, but they don't want to put their names attached to it because they don't want to risk an ambassadorship or hosting a fundraiser in the future. Lawmakers have now come out a little more publicly. We've seen some names out there saying, look, Biden, he's not fit for another term. We're seeing more of those, but we haven't had a lot of people come back to say you were right publicly. There have been a lot that have told us that privately.
Like you just described selfishness, greed, egomania, all these traits that we talked about in the Trump years. We're seeing them now in the Biden years in a dramatic fashion. And I think whenever you hear a Democrat on television now saying he's okay, he's going to be the nominee, he's our guy, Americans perceive a cover-up. It's
I
as
just
simple as
say, I
that.
think that's really overwrought. I mean, I think this is much more a concern of the chattering classes than the voters in the swing states. I mean, the reality is polls at this stage of the race, I'm writing a book on presidential campaigns right now. I can tell you the polls at this stage are not very reliable. And moreover, the polls that are out there show that the bottom has not fallen out. In fact, the real-time focus groups during the debate showed that every time Trump opened his mouth, his numbers went down,
I don't
and
think
Biden's
anyone
didn't
is
particularly. They
suggesting
were
that
pretty
Trump,
stable.
First of all, did not do well in that debate
Right.
either. He did lie a lot. However, it is also a fact, and Senator Bennett pointed this out in the last hour as well, that it's been 20 years since a Democratic nominee has been down in the polls, period, to a Republican at this stage in a campaign. 4 years ago, Joe Biden was leading Donald Trump by a lot.
True.
A lot. And it narrowed. It got closer, but he was leading. So I wonder, if you're Biden, do any of those facts pierce his internal mythology that he is always underestimated? Will there be anything that could change that view?
Well, yes. I mean, I think, but frankly, I think we are going to have Joe Biden as the nominee, barring some catastrophic repeat of what happened in the debate. And what it would really require would be some kind of intervention led by his family, Jill Biden, Hunter Biden, his sister Val. You'd probably have to add to that delegation his good friend Ted Kaufman and Mike Donilon, his closest advisor, plus I would say you would need Chris Coons and Jim Clyburn. Now, there's no evidence that any of them are moving away from Joe Biden. Quite the contrary. They're all, at this point, behind him as the nominee.
Chris, if I may, I would say a lot of people are publicly behind him as the nominee, but there's a lot that people are saying behind the scenes. What the public is also seeing, just last week, there were pre-approved questions for radio hosts that were doing interviews so that Biden could pick up the momentum and come back. And soon after that became public, then we heard in our reporting that the campaign decided not to do that anymore. When Biden stumbled at an event, the White House was completely freaked out. They changed what shoes he was wearing. They changed the stairs. There is so much stage managing going on here. And I think what our reporting shows and what we're just trying to get out is the truth. Because oftentimes the people who are answering those polls are not seeing the full picture.
Well, a lot of this stage managing goes back to Reagan when they used to literally fire up the engines on Marine One before he walked out so that he couldn't hear Sam Donaldson's questions.
Sure.
So I'm just saying this kind of stage management
a tradition
goes
that
way
continues to this day at the White House. I can attest to that.